I'm Warren. This is Charlie. He can hear, I can see. We work together. I'd like to start it off with John Landis. And do we have a spotlight that we can pick out John? John is the man that directed, conceived, etc., of the Floyd Mayweather fight. And John, as you know, he directed Coming to America, Animal House, and the one I particularly like is Trading Places. If you haven't seen Trading Places, by all means get it. It has Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy and Charlie's favorite Jamie Lee Curtis. And it's a truly great movie. It brought back Ralph Bellamy and Don Amici. Don Amici had disappeared. Well, John, thank you. Thank you. He did all that and now came to the meeting. We really appreciate it. A few months ago, while she was already working on this meeting, I said to Carrie, I think it'd be kind of nice if we had a commemorative book, sort of a retrospective on the 50 years. And I said, would you mind turning out a book, in your spare time during these couple of months while you're putting together the meeting? And she put together what I think is an absolutely terrific book, which we have outside. We printed up. We thought we printed 15,000 copies, but I think they're not quite that many. We sold 5,000 yesterday and then held back copies. But it's really a nice history of Berkshire Hathaway, and the credit 100% goes to Carrie for putting that together. So I'd just like to thank her personally, and I hope you'll thank her. And we're missing one of our great directors, Don Keogh, my neighbor from over 55 years ago. He was a coffee salesman then for Butternut Coffee, for those of you around Omaha. He broadcast Nebraska football games, and around 1950 had a radio show on WOW for 15 minutes. He was followed by a fellow named Johnny Carson, who had another 15-minute program. And Don, when I would see him in later years, he'd always say, what happened to that Carson fellow? And Don died a few weeks ago, but we are very grateful that his wife, Mickey Keogh, has joined us together. So let's have a hand for Mickey Keogh. Mickey practically raised our kids, so if they have any faults, you talk to Mickey about it. We have just... We have one slide that relates to our quarterly earnings that we could put up. We released these yesterday afternoon, and nothing particularly remarkable. The railroad, BNSF, did dramatically better last year, not only in earnings, but in all kinds of performance measures. Terms of train velocity and on time and you name it, so that we got behind last year early in the year, and there's been lots of money and, more important, lots of effort spent to get the railroad operating like it should be. And in the first quarter, those efforts paid off. We gained share. Our earnings relative to other railroads improved dramatically. So, we've got the trains running. We're going to spend a lot of money making sure we get even better. But the improvement has been huge, and I want to thank Matt Rose and Carl Ice for really extraordinary performance in having our railroad running the way it should be running. So thanks, Matt and Carl. I didn't quite get it, but I'll assume it was complimentary. Okay. I think we're ready. We're ready to move on to our questioners. We'll handle it the same way as before. We start with the journalists, we move to the analysts, and then we move to the audience. And we keep doing that until about noon. And at that time, we take a break for about an hour. And then we come back and we repeat the procedure. After we get through, I think it's either 48 or 54 questions, then we just take them all from the audience. We we have various zones where people have been selected by drawing to ask questions personally. But we start off the first one with a woman who retired after 60 years, setting a longevity record for all of Time Inc. She retired at Fortune, been my friend for many years, and in my opinion, the best print business journalist in the world, Carol Loomis. That doesn't soften her up at all, folks.
Your efforts years ago to keep Berkshire's textile mills running show you once aspired to balance capitalism with compassion. I cannot make a moral case for practices at either Clayton or 3G, and I wonder how you can do so.
It's better to back up even to the situation in mortgage lending that's taken place and why Clayton follows a pattern that actually is exemplary and rather extraordinary in the home building and mortgage business. If you look back at the housing bubble in 2000, well, ending more or less in 2008, one of the great problems, in fact, maybe the greatest cause, was the fact that the mortgage holder became totally divorced from the mortgage originator and from the home builder. In other words, the home builder built a house and sold it, took his profit, and that was that. And it didn't really make much difference who he sold it to. And the mortgage originator would originate a mortgage, but then package those, securitize them, and often sell them around, even around the world. So people thousands and thousands of miles had no connection with the original transaction. And the mortgage originator suffered no loss if the loan went bad. So you had these two parties, the one that connected with the home buyer and the one that originated the mortgage, and they had no connection with the actual outcome of whether it was a good mortgage or not. At Clayton, unlike virtually anybody, there's a few, we offer mortgages to all the buyers of our homes, and we have retained roughly $12 billion of mortgages on 300,000 homes. Now, when a mortgage goes bad, two people will lose. The person that owns the house loses, and the person that owns the mortgage loses. And in our case, we have this identity of interest. We have no interest in selling anybody a house and having the mortgage default, because it is a net loss to us. It's a net loss to the customer. And like I say, that's not true of most home builders. It's not true of most mortgage originators. And there's been much talk in terms of possible changes in mortgage rules to try and get the mortgage originator to keep some skin in the game. And they've talked about them keep retaining maybe 3% of the mortgage or something like that, just so they would have an interest in really what kind of a mortgage they were putting on the books. Well, we keep, in many cases, we offer to everybody, but we keep, probably in half the cases, we keep 100% of the mortgage. So we have exactly the same interest as society has and as the home buyer has in not making mortgage loans to people who are going to get in trouble on those loans. Now, it's true that manufactured housing hits the lower end of the market in terms of house values. Of the homes selling for $150,000, new homes selling for $150,000 or less, 70% of them are manufactured houses, and some of those people, many of those people, do not qualify on a FICO score to obtain loans that are government guaranteed. Some do, but most don't. And the question is, can you lend intelligently to people who have a good chance of making the payments and keeping that house? And Clayton has been exemplary in doing that. About 3% of the mortgages default in the year, and when they do, we lose money, and the person who bought the house loses money. But 97% don't, and most of those people would not be living in the kind of houses that you can see right here at the auditorium without the financing availabilities that Clayton makes available and others make available. And I invite you to go out and look at that house for $69,500. That house will be transported and erected, ready to go. You have to have the land, and I'll get to that in a second. But for $69,500, you have that house with appliances, with air conditioning, with a couple bedrooms, 1,200 square feet, and probably you'll put another $25,000 or so in the house, but in terms of the land and preparation there. So maybe it'll be $95,000, but you can make your own judgment as to whether that's a decent value. And I know most of you are not living in $95,000 homes, but there are an awful lot of people that aspire to do that. And we help them with our own money at risk to move into those homes. And if we make a mistake, it hurts them and it hurts us. And that is a very unusual arrangement in the financial industry. Now, I read that story, and in it, there was an item in it which, reading through the story, I just knew wasn't true. I mean, nobody that knew anything about manufactured housing could have put that up. But I'd like to put that up on the slide where it says another Clayton executive said at a 2012 affidavit that the average profit margin on Clayton homes sold in Arkansas between 2006 and 2009 was $11,170, roughly 1/5 of the average sales price of the homes. So this fellow is quoting somebody as saying that we're making a 20% profit on home sales. Well, I knew that was nonsense, so I asked for the affidavit. And I read the affidavit about 3 times, and nowhere in that affidavit was a statement made. Now, what was said was what I'd show in the next slide. It's hard for me to see what's up there, but it should show item 6, where it says Clayton manufactured homes sold 2,201 homes, and item 7 that 4% of the gross profit from the home sales total $983,000. So if we'll move to the next slide, I did a little arithmetic, and sure enough, if you take 25 times the commission was 4%, so you take 25 times, and then you divide by the number of homes, you come up with 11,170. But that statement in the affidavit said gross profit. And gross profit is not the same thing as profit. I'm not sure that the fellow that wrote the story understood that. So I have put on the next page the difference, for example, of a couple other retailers. I've put Macy's and Target. And Macy's has a 40% gross profit margin, but a pre-tax margin of 8.5%, after tax of 5 and 4. Gross profit is if it's the case of Macy's, what they pay for a sofa or something, and what they sell it for. But they also have the expenses of paying salespeople, rent, utilities, advertising, all kinds of other things. So the idea that gross profit and net profit are the same thing is, anybody that understands accounting would never make a mistake like that. In our particular case, on the next page, our gross margin is what the fellow said in the affidavit, and he used the word gross of 20%. But the writer of the story turned that into a profit margin, and our profit margin is actually 3%. So I just like to point out the mathematics on that particular subject. There's one other item you should see, and again, I have trouble seeing what's up there. But we have in every retail Clayton establishment, we have a lender board which shows exactly what a variety of lenders are willing to do and what their terms are. And we also have a sheet which I think will be put up there. And it's less than a full page, and it sets out the lenders who are available. And at the very top, I'm just looking to see whether I can find that right here. at the very top of it, it basically says, check out more than one lender, and you can send the application to any of these people. And we have people sign at the bottom, and there's no small print on it. I can't see it here, but it may look like small print. But it's one page, and multiple lenders are put on that sheet. Sometimes people borrow. If there's a credit union in San Antonio that's very big, the local bank is very big. And we also will lend money to the buyer of the home if they wish. If you buy that home that's out there, we'll give you a list of 4 or 5 lenders, probably including your local bank, and you will probably take the loan that offers you the best terms. So I make no apologies whatsoever. Various ways. I mean, some people call to the office, some people write in. I can say in the last 3 years, I have not received one call. We got 300,000 loans. I have not received one call from any party in connection with a Clayton home. Moreover, at Clayton, we are regulated in almost every state in which we have financing, which is practically every state. And in the last 3 years, we have had, I think it's 91 examinations by the state. 91 examinations. They come in, they look at our practices, they make sure that they conform with the laws. And in those 91, I think the largest fine we've had has been $5,500. And the largest group of refunds we had was about $110,000. There were, and those were regulated not only by those states, we're regulated by HUD, all kinds of people. When we can, we try to get people an FHA loan because that's the best loan for them to get. But as I say, most of our borrowers are below the 620 FICO score, and it's true that 3% or so will lose their homes in a year, and it's true that 97% of those people will have a home where their average principal and interest payment is a little under $600 a month, and that takes care of having a 2 and perhaps 3 bedroom house, well equipped. I invite you to go through it. And Clayton has behaved, in my book, extraordinarily well. The article talked about 30-year mortgages. Over 4.5 years ago, I said we're not going to have 30-year mortgages. So we don't have them except for the FHA guaranteed ones, which of course have a very low rate. So I have I'm proud of the Clayton management. I'm proud of the fact that they put this year maybe 30,000 people in homes at a very low cost, a very good home, and a very high percentage of those people are going to have those loans paid off probably in 20 years and have a home that has cost them, it's been a real bargain, basically. I'll get to the other question, the 3G question, in a second. I'll give Charlie a chance to say what he'd like to.
Well, I don't know a lot about the mortgage practices of Clayton, but I certainly know that we've sold an enormous number of houses, and we have a big share of the total market in manufactured.
About 50%.
Yeah, 50%. And it's a very constructive thing. Personally, I've always wondered why manufactured houses don't have a bigger share of the market. It's such an efficient way of creating quite usable houses. Part of the reason is that the tract builders under capitalism got so efficient. And isn't Clayton now doing some tract building itself?
Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So Clayton is a very productive part of the economy, but we can't make lending to poor people who buy houses 100% successful for everybody. We wouldn't be running the business right if the foreclosure rate was 0. Too many people would deserve credit that wouldn't get it.
Yeah, the big causes of default are the loss of a job, death, and divorce, and that happens with high-priced houses as well, but it happens more often with people that are living closer to the edge. But I don't think that's a reason to deny them a house, and particularly when so many, it turns out so well for so many. The 2008 recession and 9 was very interesting because all kinds of securitized deals involving houses costing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, the default rate on those was many, many, many times what happened in our own case. And similarly with delinquency rates, our delinquency rates are running about 3% currently. And, the people want to live in those houses, and I think they deserve the right to. Incidentally, a few years ago, we had a couple of houses here. We called them the Warren and the Charlie. The Charlie sold first, and it sold to one of the cameramen who was in the credits on the movie you just saw. And you can check with Matt, and Matt Mason. He is very, very happy with that house he bought 4 or 5 years ago. The second question was about 3G, and I don't think you can ever find a statement that Charlie and I have ever made in terms of Berkshire's companies or anybody else's where we said that there should be more people working than are needed in a company. And the 3G people have been successful in building marvelous businesses, and it is true that they have entered into some purchases where there were considerably more people running the business than needed. And the interesting thing is that after they reduced the headcount to the number needed, the companies have done extremely well. I mean, you've seen Burger King outgrow its main competitor by a significant margin. You've seen Tim Horton have some very good figures in the first quarter, and I don't know of any company that has a policy that says we're going to have a lot more people than we need. But a good many companies end up in that position, and if 3G buys into one, they quite promptly and treat people well in terms of the severance, but they get it down to what they need. And I hope our Berkshire companies are not being run with more people than they need either. They usually aren't when we buy them, and we look for those kind of companies that are well managed. 3G will. If they find out that 100 people are doing what 50 people can do, they'll get it to where 50 people are doing it. And I think that actually makes sense throughout American business. Charlie?
Well, the alternate to the system of having your company right-sized, the right number of people, is what eventually happened in Russia. And there everybody had a job. And the way it all worked out was some worker said, well, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. And the whole damn economy didn't work. Of course we want the right number of people in the jobs.
It's interesting in the railroad business. After World War II, in 1947 or thereabouts, I think there were about 1.6 million people in the railroad business, and it was a lousy business. And capital was short for any kind of improvements. And now there are less than 200,000. So they've gone from 1.6 million to less than 200,000, carrying more distance and doing it in far safer conditions. Safety has improved dramatically in the railroad industry. And if somebody thinks it would be better to be running the railroads with 1.6 million, people doing it, you would have a terrible railroad system. You wouldn't have anything like you have today. Efficiency is required over time in capitalism, and I really tip my hat to what the 3G people have done.
Van Tuyl is a fabulously productive auto dealer that has, since its founding, used a traditional negotiated model with a particular successful emphasis on profitable add-on insurance and financial products. Meanwhile, at least some other auto dealers have adopted or are moving towards models which emphasize fixed prices, transparency, and low sales pressure. Will Van Tuyl eventually need to adapt to this new mode of selling, or do you feel the traditional method of selling cars will be viable for decades into the future? If the market requires a new way of selling, how hard is it for a sales culture that has been successful for decades doing business one way to change?
If a change is required, it'll be made. And I don't know the answers to which way it's going to go on that. It's true that people have been, and that's not new. That's been experimented with before, where people have tried a one-price system and no negotiating, no haggling, and everything. And I think a very large number of people would like to see that system, except when they actually get into it, it seems to break down for some reason. There's negotiation going on in a lot of businesses, and it always amazes me. People say they don't like it, but it's what ends up happening. And so Van Tuyl will adapt to what the customer wants. We'll see how some of these experiments go, and I don't think there'd be any problem at all if the world goes in that direction in Van Tuyl going to it. But I wouldn't be surprised if 5 or 10 years from now the system is pretty much the same. I wouldn't be totally surprised if it changes either, but I can't predict the outcome. I can predict that Van Tuyl and the subsequent auto dealerships we buy, I can predict that they will be a very important part of Berkshire, and I think will be quite profitable in relation to the capital we employ in the business. Charlie?
Well, I very much like that acquisition, partly because I think we can do a lot more like it.
You think you'll be negotiating on cars 10 years from now when you buy a new one?
It's been amazingly resistant to change for my whole lifetime.
Yeah, happens in the jewelry business too. I mean, there are certain items. Well, it happens in real estate. I mean, let's just say that some real estate firm said we're only going to take listings where you can't negotiate. Do you think? I'm not sure how it would do in terms of obtaining both listings and customers. That people seem to want to negotiate. If they hear a house is priced at $200,000, they're not going, unless it's in some unusual situation, they're not going to step right up and pay the $200,000. They're going to bid. When people are dealing with a big ticket item, a lot of people, their natural tendency is to negotiate, and particularly will do so if they think that that's built into the system. So I'm not sure how it changes, but we'll do fine whatever direction it goes.
Can you name at least 5 characteristics of a company that gives you confidence to predict its earnings?
Charlie, what are your 5?
We don't have a one-size-fits-all system for buying businesses. They're all different. Every industry is different. And we also keep learning. So what we did 10 years ago, we hopefully are doing better now. But we can't give you a formula that will help you.
No, if you're looking at the BNSF Railroad, as we were in 2009, or if you're looking at Van Tuyl in 2014, there are a lot of things that go through our minds, and most of the things that go through our minds are things that will stop us from going further. I mean, there's the filters are there, and there are a lot of things that, if we see it in a business, including maybe who we're dealing with, will stop us from going on to the next layer. But it's very different in different businesses. We are looking for things where we do think we've got some reasonable fix on how it's going to look in 5 or 10 years, and that does eliminate a great many businesses. But it's not the same 5 questions at all. Certainly, when we're buying a business where we're going to have somebody that's selling it to us continue to run it for us, a very big question is, do we really want to be in partnership with this person and count on them to behave in the future when they don't own the business as they've behaved in the past when they do own the business? And that stops a fair number of deals. But I can't give you a 5. We don't have a list of 5. Or if we do, Charlie's kept it from me.
Is IBM similar to those textile mills in the 1960s? And did you try to talk Warren out of buying IBM?
The answer is no. I think IBM is a very interesting company. It totally dominated Hollerith machines, the punch card computing. And then when they invented electronic computing. It dominated that for a while. It's very rare that when a technological change comes along that people adapt as successfully as IBM did that time. Well, now they've had the personal computer, and that's been a mixed bag. But I think IBM is a very credible company, and we own a lot of companies that have temporary reverses or once were mightier in some ways than they are now. IBM is still an enormous enterprise, and I think it's still a very admirable enterprise, and I think we bought it at a reasonable price.
When we bought it, it was a 2-0 vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Incidentally, there's one thing that I always find interesting. We get asked questions about investments we own, and people think we want to talk them up, or we have no interest in encouraging other people to buy the investments we own. I mean, we are better off because either we or the company is likely to be buying stock in the future. Why would we want the stock to go up if we're going to be a buyer next year and the year after and the year after that? But the whole mentality of Wall Street is that if you buy something, even if you're going to buy more of it later on, or if the company's going to buy its own stock, and the people seem to think that they're better off if it goes up the next day or the next week or the next month. And that's why they talk about talking your book. If we talked our book from our standpoint, we would say pessimistic things about all four of the biggest holdings we have, because all four of them are repurchasing their shares, and obviously the cheaper they repurchase their shares, the better off we are. But people don't seem to get that point. You have any idea why, Charlie?
Warren, if people weren't so often wrong, we wouldn't be so rich.
No. He's finally explained it to me. Okay.
In his letter, Charlie talked about Berkshire's insurance success, quote, being so astoundingly large that I believe that Buffett would now fail to recreate it if he returned to a small base while retaining his smarts and regaining his youth. So, what do you think are the conditions in the insurance industry today that would inhibit a repeat of that performance?
Well, I had many pieces of luck, but I had 3 extraordinary pieces of luck in terms of the insurance business. One was when I was 20 years old, having a fellow on a Saturday, a fellow named Lorimer Davidson, be willing to spend 4 hours with some 20-year-old kid who he never heard of before, explain the insurance business to him. So I received an education at age 20 that I couldn't have gotten at any business school in the United States. And that was just pure luck. I mean, I just happened to go to Washington. I had no idea I would run into him. I had no idea whether he would talk to me. And he spent 4 hours with me. So just chalk that one up, the chances of that happening again. In 1967, I got lucky again when Jack Ringwald, who for about 5 minutes every year wanted to sell his company because he would get mad about something. Some claim had come in that he didn't like or something of the sort. And I told my friend Charlie Hyder, I said, next time Jack is in the mood, be sure and get him to my office. And Charlie got him up there one day, and we bought National Indemnity. We couldn't have done that. We not only couldn't have done that a day later, we couldn't have done it an hour later. But it just, and that was lucky. And then I really got lucky in the mid-'80s when, on a Saturday, some guy came in the office and he said, I've never worked in the insurance business, but maybe I can do you some good. And that was Ajit Jain. And how lucky can you get? So if you ask me whether we could pull off a trifecta like that again in the future, I'd say the odds are very much against it. But the whole thing in business is being open to ideas as they come along, and insurance happened to be something that I could understand. I mean, that was in my sweet spot. If Lorimer Davidson had talked to me about some other business, it wouldn't have done any good. But it just so happened he hit a chord with me on that in explaining it. I could understand what he was talking about. And I could understand what national indemnity was when Jack had it for sale. And there's an awful lot of accident in life. But if you keep yourself open to having good accidents happen and kind of get past the bad accidents, some good things will happen. Might not happen in insurance, it can happen in some other field. Probably would happen in some other field if you were to start in today. So, no, we could not have, you couldn't expect to have 3 lucky events like that happen, and there were many more along the way. But, we'd have, I think if we were starting over again, we'd find something else to do. What about it, Charlie?
Yeah, but I don't think we would have that kind of success. Mostly we've bought wonderful businesses and nourished them, but the reinsurance division was just created out of whole cloth right here in Omaha, and it's a huge business. Insurance has been different for us.
How can we, as outside investors, judge the state of Berkshire's culture long after you depart?
I think it's fair that you do, come with a questioning mind to the culture, post me and Charlie. But I think you're going to be very. I don't think you should be surprised, but I think you will be very pleased with the outcome. The culture. I think Berkshire's culture runs as deep as any large company could be in the world. It's interesting here from Germany because just 3 or 4 days ago, we closed on a transaction with a woman named Mrs. Louis in Germany, and she and her husband had built a business over 35 years. They'd spent developing this business of retail shops dealing with motorcycle owners, and lovingly had built this business. Her husband died a couple years ago, and Mrs. Louis in Germany, it came about in sort of a roundabout way, but she wanted to sell to Berkshire Hathaway. And, that would not have been the case 30 or 40 years ago. So it's a vital part of Berkshire to have a clearly defined, deeply embedded culture that pervades the parent company, the subsidiary companies. It's even reflected in our shareholders. And, when you have 97% of the shareholders vote and say we don't want a dividend, I don't think there's another company like that in the world. So we have our directors sign on for it, and there again, we behave consistently. Instead of having a bunch of directors who love to be a director because they'd like to get $200,000 or $300,000 a year for showing up 4 times a year, we have directors who look at it as a great opportunity for stewardship and who want their ownership and have their ownership represented by buying stock in the market exactly like you do. So we try to make clear and define that culture in every way possible, and it's gotten reinforced over the years to an extreme degree. People who join us believe in it. People who shun us don't believe in it. So it's self-reinforcing, and I think it's a virtual certainty to continue and to become even stronger, because once Charlie and I aren't around, it will be so clear that it's not the force of personality, but it's institutionalized that nobody will doubt that it will really continue for decades and decades and decades to come. Charlie?
Well, as I said in the annual report, I think Berkshire's going to do fine after we're gone. In fact, it'll do a lot better in dollars. But percentage-wise, it will never gain at the rate we did in the early years. And that's all right. There's worse tragedies in life than having Berkshire's assets and have the growth rate slow a little.
Name one.
Warren, I have one not very far ahead.
I should say that culture is everything at Berkshire, and if you run into a terrible culture, it's the Solomon thing was up there on the screen, and it would be hard to turn Solomon into a Berkshire. I don't think we could have done it, Charlie.
I don't think anybody's ever done it on Wall Street.
It's a different world, and that doesn't mean that Berkshire is a monastery by any means, but it does mean that I can guarantee you that Charlie and I and a great many of our managers are more concerned, and Kerry Soba, who put this meeting together and everything, they are more concerned about getting a good job done for Berkshire than what they get out of it themselves. And it's great to work around people like that.
Have we reached an inflection point in human behavior in how consumers view sugar consumption? And do you think Coca-Cola's moat and potentially that of Heinz or Kraft's is narrowing? And if not, what news would it take you to be convinced that it is?
Well, I think it's an enormously wide moat, but I think it's also true that the trends you described are happening. But there will be 1.9 billion 8-ounce servings of Coca-Cola products, not Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola products consumed in the world today. And I don't think you're going to see anything revolutionary, and I think you will see all food and beverage companies adjust to the expressed preferences of the consumers as they go along. No company ever does well ignoring its consumers, but there will be, I would predict 20 years from now, there will be more people, there will be more Coca-Cola cases consumed than there are now by some margin. Back in the late 1930s, Fortune ran an article saying that the growth of Coca-Cola was all over, and when we bought our Coca-Cola stock in 1988, people were not that enthused about gross profitabilities for the product. I sit here as somebody who, in the last 30 years, 1/4 of all the calories I've consumed come from Coca-Cola. And that is not an exaggeration. I am 1/4 Coca-Cola. I'm not sure which quarter, but if you really, I don't think there is this choice. I think there's a lot to be said about being happy with what you're doing. If I'd been eating broccoli and Brussels sprouts and all that all my life, I don't think I'd live as long. Every meal I would approach thinking, it's like going to jail or something. And no, I think, Charlie? Charlie's 91, and his habits aren't that different than mine. They're slightly better. But
there's no question about it. The way I look at it is, sugar is an enormously helpful substance. It prevents premature softening of the arteries. And the way I look at it is that if I die a little sooner, that'll just be avoiding a few months of drooling in a nursing home.
Charlie and I have enjoyed every meal we've ever had virtually, except when I was eating at my grandfather's, and he maybe eat those damn green vegetables. But there obviously are some shifts in preferences, although it's remarkable how durable items are in this field. Berkshire Hathaway, I believe, was the largest shareholder of General Foods from about 1981 or thereabouts to about 1984 when it was bought by Philip Morris. And, that's 30 plus years ago, and those same brands, they went through Philip Morris, they got spun out as Kraft, they broke Kraft into two pieces, but now we're going to own those brands, and they're terrific brands. But, Heinz goes back to 1869. The ketchup came out a little later. They went bankrupt actually when they were counting on the horseradish or whatever it was. But the ketchup came out in the 1870s, and Coca-Cola dates to 1886. And it's a pretty good bet that an awful lot of people are going to like the same thing. And when I compare drinking Coca-Cola, to something that somebody would sell me at Whole Foods, I don't know. I don't see smiles on the faces of people at Whole Foods. So I like the brands we're buying.
But where do you feel the greatest return will come from longer term? Rolling up auto dealerships or tapping into the advantages that are inherent in the full service model?
There are not any huge advantages of scale, at least that I'm aware of, in owning lots of dealerships. But running dealerships well is a very good business. It's a local business. So I don't see that having there are 17,000 dealers in the country. And if you ask the people here in Omaha to name a bunch of dealers, they'd come up with a bunch of local names. And I don't think that you widen profit margins, particularly by having 1,000 dealers versus having 100 or even having one very good dealer. So we will be buying, I hope, more dealerships, but it will be based on local considerations. We don't see the finance business in dealers. We don't bring anything to that party. John Sumpf is here from Wells Fargo. I think they're the biggest auto finance company in the United States. And they have a cost of funds advantage over Berkshire. Berkshire is able to borrow money at a low price, but I forget whether John's liabilities cost him something like 12 basis points or something like that last quarter. And we can't come up with money as cheap as the banks can, and they're the natural lenders for loans. So we're not going to be in the finance business. We will keep looking for dealerships, maybe groups of dealers. It doesn't give us a buying advantage from the manufacturer, and we will hope that we run those local operations very well, and that they're regarded by the people who buy cars as a local business, not some part of some giant operation. So I think you'll see us buying more, but I don't think you'll see us widening out margins from what existed before, except in the cases where we can run a local dealer better. Charlie?
Well, yes, and Van Tuyl has a system of meritocracy where the right people get the power and get some ownership and so on. It reminds me a lot of the Kiewit Company, an Omaha company in whose headquarters Berkshire resides as a tenant. And the Van Tuyl and Kiewit are kissing cousins. Those are very successful cultures, and I think they've got a very good thing going for them. The right people are prospering in Van Tuyl.
Some tips from you about what characteristics you thought about 45 years ago when you were building the culture and values at Berkshire Hathaway.
Culture has to come from the top. It has to be consistent. It has to be part of written communications. It has to be, it has to be lived, and it has to be rewarded when followed and punished when not. And then it takes a very, very long time to really become solid. And obviously, it's much easier to do it if you inherit a culture you like, and it's easier in smaller firms, I think. I can think of a lot of companies, very big companies in this country, and I don't think if Charlie and I were around them for 10 years, we'd be able to accomplish much of anything. So it is a grain of sand type of thing, and people, just like your child, sees what you do rather than what you say. It's the same thing in a business, that people see how those above them behave, and they move in that direction. They don't all move that way. We've got 340,000 people now working for Berkshire, and I will guarantee you that there's some number, a dozen, maybe 50, maybe 100, that are doing something today that they shouldn't be doing. What you have to do is when you find out about it, you have to do something about it. I didn't like, for example, making 30-year mortgages at Clayton 5 years ago, and I said, we're not going to make 30-year mortgages, unless they're government guaranteed. And when we bought Kirby, there were some sales practices we didn't like, and we particularly didn't like them with older people. So we put in a golden age policy where if you were over 65 and you bought a Kirby, and for any reason you didn't like it, anytime up to a year, you could send it and get all of your money back. And I encouraged people to write me if they had a problem on anything like that. So it takes a lot of time. And at Geico, we're going to send out millions and millions and millions of claims. And I will guarantee you that when two people are in an auto accident, they don't agree 100% of the time on whose fault it was. So they may go away and be unhappy for a time, but we work all the time at trying to behave with other people as if our positions were reversed. That's what Charlie's always advised in all our activities, and we've tried to follow it, and we're certainly far from perfect at it. But if you keep working at it, it does get results. Charlie?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we did this work best of all is we were always dissatisfied with what we already knew, and we always wanted to know more. And Berkshire, if Warren and I had stayed frozen in time, particularly Warren, it would have been
I'd like to do it, understand.
It would have been a terrible place. It's what we kept learning that made it work. And I don't think that will ever stop.